Today's topic is how to make any woman chase you even if she's not interested. And before we go any further, let me make this clear. We're not talking about tricks, pressure, or trying to force someone into feeling something they don't. What we are talking about is the psychology behind attraction, the quiet shift that happens when a man stops reaching and starts becoming someone worth reaching for. I've seen this dynamic play out countless times in my work, and it always starts the same way. Men trying too hard and women feeling nothing because effort alone doesn't create attraction. Welcome back to the channel. Let me start with something that might feel uncomfortable. A woman not showing interest doesn't automatically mean she never could. I've sat across from men who were convinced a woman wanted nothing to do with them, only for her to suddenly become curious once the man changed the way he showed up in his own life. And I've also seen the opposite, men who chased so intensely that they drained any possibility of attraction before it could grow. The controversy here is simple. Many men believe the key is to do more, but the truth I've witnessed repeatedly is that doing less and doing it with intention creates far stronger pull. There's something powerful about a man who isn't desperate for validation, who doesn't hinge his emotional world on someone else's reaction. Women notice that. People notice that. It's human psychology, not gender warfare. And I'll tell you this, from years of listening to people's private fears and hopes, most men don't need to become someone women chase. They need to become someone they respect first. Once that shift begins, interest from others, women included, often follows naturally. This video is about understanding that shift, the internal changes that subtly alter how others respond to you. Nothing manipulative, nothing unethical, just self-control, emotional grounding, and behaviors that spark genuine curiosity. Now that we've set the stage, let me walk you through the 7 sections that will break this down clearly and simply. 1. Stop seeking her approval. When I talk to men about attraction, this is the first place I always begin. The moment you start chasing someone's approval, you lose the relationship you could have had. I've watched this happen countless times. A man sits across from me, frustrated, confused, wondering why a woman seems distant or uninterested, and I can always trace it back to one thing. His emotional center shifted away from himself and toward her reactions. Whether he realized it or not, everything he did became an attempt to be liked, noticed, or chosen. And the strange part is that this very effort is what pushed her further away. People can feel when you're performing for acceptance. It creates pressure. It creates imbalance, and it turns conversation, connection, and presence into a test you're constantly trying to pass. When a man seeks approval, he stops being authentic and starts being strategic, laughing when he doesn't find something funny, agreeing with things he doesn't believe, offering his time even when he doesn't have it. It's subtle, but it shifts the energy, and women, like anyone, sense that shift immediately. I've spoken with men who were deeply kind, generous, thoughtful, traits that could naturally attract anyone, but those qualities got buried under a layer of anxious pleasing. They weren't showing the woman who they truly were, they were showing a version designed for emotional safety, and in the process, they unintentionally communicated that her opinion mattered more than their own self-respect. That's where attraction fades. When a woman doesn't sense that a man is grounded in his own identity, she struggles to trust the connection, not because she wants arrogance or coldness, but because confidence, real confidence, comes from being able to stay centered in who you are. Approval seeking does the opposite. It places your emotional worth in someone else's hands. When I guide men through this shift, I always emphasize that attraction grows when a man stops trying to convince someone he's valuable and instead starts living in a way that reflects his value. That means speaking honestly, even when it feels uncomfortable. It means slowing down your responses so you're not reacting out of fear. It means letting the conversation breathe instead of filling every silence with nervous energy. And more importantly, it means creating a life, mindset, and emotional posture that isn't dependent on someone choosing you. Because here's what usually happens, and I've seen this repeatedly. The moment a man stops adjusting himself to win approval, the dynamic changes. He becomes more relaxed, more present, more real. His voice steadies. His boundaries take shape. He communicates from a place of choice instead of desperation. And it's often right then, in that shift, that the woman begins to pay attention in a different way. Approval seeking tells her she has the power to define you. Self-respect tells her you define yourself. Women don't chase approval. They chase emotional grounding. They chase presence. They chase a man who stands firm in himself. And that begins the moment you stop asking for permission to be enough. 2. Create emotional space. She can feel. One of the hardest concepts for men to grasp, yet one of the most transformative, is the idea of emotional space. Not distance, not coldness, not punishment, emotional space. It's the quiet shift that happens when you stop trying to force a connection and allow the other person to meet you halfway. And I can tell you, after years of working with men who struggled with attraction, this is the point where everything usually begins to change. Most men misunderstand emotional space because they confuse effort with progress. They think the more they text, the more they initiate plans, the more they show interest, the more likely she is to feel something. But human psychology doesn't work that way. The more you try to create closeness before she's emotionally ready, the more you push her out of it. People naturally pull away from anything that feels intrusive, even subtly. And often, men don't realize how intrusive they're being because their intentions feel genuine. They're not trying to overwhelm her, they're trying to connect. But the subconscious message becomes, I need your attention to feel okay. And that is where attraction quietly dissolves. I've had men come into my office exhausted from overgiving. They weren't doing anything malicious, they were simply trying too hard. And every time I walk them through a simple truth, interest grows in the space where someone has room to feel their own curiosity. You can't spark curiosity in someone who never gets a chance to wonder where you are, what you're doing, or how you're feeling. Emotional space creates that wonder, not as a tactic, but as a natural response when you live a balanced life. When a woman senses you're not anxiously waiting for her reactions, she gets to experience you in a different way. She sees that you're grounded, that you have your own rhythm, your own priorities, your own self-respect. That kind of man doesn't disappear or withdraw out of anger. He simply lives a full life that doesn't revolve around trying to secure someone else's approval. And that creates emotional pull. I've heard women describe this shift without even realizing it. They talk about how refreshing it feels when a man isn't always available at the snap of a finger. They talk about how appealing it is when he has something meaningful happening outside of her. They talk about the security they feel when he isn't emotionally dependent on their validation. Emotional space communicates all of that without a single word. This doesn't mean ignoring her or pretending you don't care. It means allowing the natural pace of connection to unfold instead of pushing for certainty too early. It's giving her the freedom to lean in, not because she's pressured, but because she genuinely wants to. And when that happens, a woman doesn't just notice the difference, she feels it. And often, for the first time, she becomes the one who starts moving toward you. 3. Let your actions show self-respect. When I sit with men who feel invisible to the women they care about, there's a pattern I see over and over again. They talk about how much effort they've put in, how much they've tried to show kindness, consistency, patience, yet none of it seems to change anything. And when I ask them what their actions say about how they value themselves, there's usually a silence that tells me everything. Because the truth is, attraction rarely dies because a man isn't doing enough. It dies because what he is doing tells her he doesn't value himself. Let me explain what I mean. I've observed a simple, almost predictable dynamic. When a man acts like someone whose time doesn't matter, whose boundaries don't matter, whose emotional needs don't matter, he teaches the woman in front of him to treat him exactly the same way. Not intentionally, not maliciously, just naturally. We respond to cues, even subtle ones. And a man who constantly overextends himself sends the clearest cue of all. I will accept less than I deserve. That's where the shift must begin. Showing self-respect isn't loud. It's not arrogance, dominance, or any kind of performance. It's quiet, steady, and deeply attractive because it communicates something essential. You see yourself as a man of value, and you live in alignment with that belief. I've watched men change entire relational dynamics, not by being more charming or more available, but by making one radical decision to stop abandoning themselves in hopes of being chosen. A woman feels this instantly, even if she can't explain it. When your actions come from self-respect, the energy changes. You answer messages with clarity, not urgency. You show up to conversations with honesty, not fear. You stop saying yes when your whole body is saying no. You stop trying to prove your worth and instead allow your boundaries to express it. I remember one client describing how he shifted from texting constantly to responding when he was actually free and mentally present. Not as a game, but because he finally accepted that his time and attention weren't something to be thrown around carelessly. Within weeks, the woman who once barely acknowledged him started initiating, asking questions, showing interest. What changed? Not his personality, not his looks, not his behavior toward her. What changed was how he treated himself, and she simply followed the emotional tone he set. When your actions show self-respect, you stop grasping for connection. You stop offering all your energy up front. You begin moving through the world like someone who knows he has options, purpose, and identity outside of any single woman's approval. And that quiet confidence becomes magnetic. Self-respect doesn't chase, it invites, it doesn't rush, it allows, and most importantly, it doesn't shrink in hopes of being chosen. It stands tall, which gives her something real to choose in the first place. 4. Build a life that pulls, not pushes. One thing I've learned from years of listening to people navigate relationships is that attraction rarely grows out of pressure. It grows out of presence. And nothing creates presence more naturally than a life that feels full, grounded, and meaningful. I once worked with someone who taught me this lesson in the most unexpected way. I won't use names, of course, but his situation is one I've seen many times. He came to me because he was deeply invested in a woman who barely acknowledged his efforts. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was thoughtful, sincere, patient. But his entire world revolved around her attention. Every plan he made depended on her availability. Every shift in her tone changed his entire mood. Every unanswered message felt like a personal failure. His life had become a waiting room, waiting for her to choose him, waiting for her to validate him, waiting for her to make him feel wanted. And the painful part was that she wasn't trying to hurt him. She simply didn't feel pulled toward someone who had abandoned his own life for hers. As we worked through his patterns, he realized that he had slowly stopped being the man he once was. The man who used to go hiking on weekends, who had hobbies that excited him, who spent time with friends, who pursued goals that gave him direction. That version of him had a presence, a gravity, a rhythm that made him feel alive. But once he became emotionally dependent on one outcome with one person, all of that faded, and with it, her interest faded too. The turning point came when he began rebuilding the pieces of his life he had paused, not as a tactic, not as a way to manipulate her into chasing him. He did it because he finally understood something essential. A relationship cannot be the center of your world. It can only be something that adds to a world you're already proud of. Within a few months, something interesting happened. The same woman who once felt distant began asking about his plans. She wondered why he wasn't always available. She noticed how relaxed he seemed, how fulfilled he looked. She even mentioned how different his energy felt, lighter, more confident, more grounded. She wasn't responding to a trick, she was responding to the return of the man he originally was. Building a life that pulls doesn't mean living selfishly, it means living fully. It means having passions that light you up, friendships that support you, goals that stretch you, and a sense of identity that doesn't dissolve the moment someone gives or withholds attention. A woman feels drawn to a man who is already in motion, someone she can walk beside, not someone waiting for her direction. When your life has momentum, you don't need to push for connection. She feels the pull naturally, and often that's when she starts leaning in on her own. 5. Use silence as a form of strength. silence is one of the most misunderstood tools in relationships. Most men think silence means withdrawal, punishment, or an attempt to gain control. But the kind of silence I teach has nothing to do with manipulation. It's the silence that comes from emotional steadiness, the kind that gives both people space to breathe, think, and recalibrate. And if you've ever been in a situation where you felt like you were doing all the emotional heavy lifting, you already know how powerful this can be. I once worked with someone dealing with a painfully familiar dynamic. He was deeply committed to a woman who seemed to respond only when things were intense. Every disagreement turned into a debate he felt obligated to solve. Every cold moment from her pushed him into over-explaining, over-texting, or overreaching. He believed that if he filled every moment with clarity, reassurance, or emotional effort, then she would feel safe and eventually more connected to him. But the reality was far different. The more he talked, the more she shut down. The more he pursued, the more she withdrew. And the more he tried to fix the emotional climate, the more chaotic it became. It wasn't that she didn't care. It was that she never had the chance to experience her own thoughts because he filled the silence with his anxiety. The breakthrough moment happened when he tried something that felt completely unnatural to him. He allowed silence to exist, not angry silence, not defensive silence, just quiet space where he listened instead of reacted, breathed instead of panicked, and paused instead of pushing. At first, he said it felt wrong, almost uncomfortable, but slowly he began to notice shifts. She started sharing more without being prompted. She opened up about things she had never said before. She even mentioned how different the relationship felt. Less suffocating, less pressured, more balanced. What changed? Not her, not the circumstances. What changed was his emotional posture. Silence gave her room to process instead of feeling chased. It gave him space to stay centered rather than scrambling for emotional control. And it transformed their communication because it transformed the energy underneath it. Men often underestimate how powerful emotional stillness can be. When you stop trying to fill every moment with explanations, validation, or reassurance, you stop signaling instability. You stop showing that you crumble under uncertainty. Instead, you show calmness, resilience, and confidence, qualities that naturally draw people in. Silence isn't about ignoring someone. It's about respecting the natural rhythm of connection. It's about choosing to respond when you're grounded rather than reacting in fear. It's about allowing moments to unfold without forcing a conclusion. In the relationship I mentioned, silence didn't create distance. It created clarity. It allowed him to show strength without aggression, presence without pressure, and maturity without emotional noise. That is the kind of silence that makes a woman lean in, not pull away. 6. Respond, don't react. If there's one skill that consistently separates men who create healthy attraction from those who unintentionally push it away, it's the ability to respond instead of react. This difference might sound small, but it changes the entire tone of a connection. I've seen this play out more times than I can count, especially with men who feel constantly on edge with the woman they care about. Every message, every pause, every shift in tone feels like a test they have to hurry to pass. That pressure leads them into reactive behavior. Fast replies, emotional overcorrections, defensive explanations, or impulsive decisions driven more by anxiety than clarity. Responding is different. Responding requires presence, not panic, and women feel that difference immediately. Let me paint a picture you might recognize. A man comes into my office feeling defeated because the woman he wants seems unpredictable. One day she's warm, the next day she's detached. When she takes longer than usual to respond, he assumes the worst and rushes to fix something that isn't broken. When she expresses a concern, he reacts instantly, either apologizing too much or arguing to protect himself. His reactions are fast, intense, and emotionally charged, and every time he ends up feeling like he said or did too much. This isn't a flaw in his character, it's a survival instinct. When we feel uncertain, we react. When we feel secure, we respond. The shift began when he learned to slow down, not his affection, not his presence, but his emotional reflexes. He started taking a breath before answering messages. He gave himself a moment before replying to something that bothered him. He learned to sit with discomfort instead of trying to immediately escape it through words or explanations. What happened next surprised him. The tension in their conversations began to fade. She felt safer expressing herself because he wasn't jumping in to fix or defend. She became more open because he didn't overwhelm the moment with intensity, and slowly she started showing more interest because the emotional climate around him became steady, not chaotic. When you respond instead of react, you communicate that you're grounded. You show that you're capable of holding emotions, yours and hers, without losing control. You show that uncertainty doesn't break you. This is one of the most attractive qualities a man can display, not because it impresses her, but because it makes her feel emotionally secure around you. Reacting comes from fear. Responding comes from strength. Men often underestimate how deeply this influences attraction. When a woman sees that you don't spiral when something feels off, she sees a man who can lead with calmness, not control. She sees someone who isn't owned by his emotions. And whether she realizes it consciously or not, that steadiness makes her lean closer. A reaction is impulsive. A response is intentional. And intention is what builds real connection. 7. Become the man. She's curious about curiosity is one of the most powerful forces in attraction, yet most men overlook it completely. They think attraction grows only through effort, showing interest, being consistent, being supportive, being available. While all of those things matter, they only work when a woman actually feels something toward you. And what sparks that feeling more often than not is curiosity. Not confusion, not mystery games, but genuine curiosity about who you are, how you think, and what moves you. I often tell men this: people don't chase what they fully understand. They chase what continues to unfold. I once worked with a man who struggled in every dating experience he had, not because he lacked charm or kindness. He had both. His problem was that he offered everything up front. Every thought, every plan, every intention, every feeling. He believed that transparency would bring him closer to the woman he liked. In reality, it made the connection feel predictable. She never had the chance to wonder about him. Nothing unfolded naturally because everything was declared immediately. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He simply didn't understand that attraction needs room to breathe. When he began slowing down, revealing himself over time instead of all at once, something shifted. He didn't hide anything. He didn't pretend to be mysterious. He simply let his personality come out gradually, the same way it does in any authentic relationship. He shared pieces of his world without explaining the entire story in one day. He let her see his interests, his values, his humor, his boundaries, one layer at a time. What happened next was predictable, but still surprising to him. She leaned in. She asked more questions. She paid more attention. She became invested, not because he was trying to create attraction, but because she finally had something to explore. Curiosity forms when a man lives in a way that isn't one-dimensional. When he has passions that don't exist solely to impress someone, when he expresses opinions that aren't shaped by fear of rejection, when he maintains standards that aren't negotiable just because he likes someone, when he tells stories not to win points, but because they're simply part of who he is, a woman becomes curious about a man who has depth. Emotional, intellectual, and personal. Not dramatic depth, not dark complexity, but genuine layers that reveal themselves naturally. And here's the part most men misunderstand. You don't create curiosity by withholding. You create it by living fully. When you're engaged in your own world, you naturally become more engaging to others. When you're connected to your goals, your personality, your values, you don't need to act mysterious. You already have a compelling presence because you're not performing. You're existing with intention. Curiosity grows when a woman senses that there's more to learn, more to understand, more to experience in your presence. And that happens when you're not trying to be impressive. You're simply being yourself in a way that's grounded, confident, and real. Become the man who doesn't need validation to feel complete. That's the man she becomes genuinely curious about, and often the man she starts chasing. Attraction doesn't grow from pressure, chasing, or trying to convince someone to feel something. It grows from emotional steadiness, self-respect, and the quiet confidence that comes from living a grounded life. When you stop seeking approval, create healthy space, act with self-value, and respond with intention, you shift the dynamic entirely. You become a man who leads with calmness instead of fear, depth instead of desperation, and presence instead of performance. And that's when women notice, often without you trying. In the end, the goal isn't to make her chase you, it's to become someone worth moving toward.